Nintendo had Mario, Sega had Sonic, and for the PlayStation 1 era at least, Sony had Crash. An animal mascot with bucket loads of character, Crash Bandicoot helped Sony's new console establish a beachhead in the marketplace and demonstrate the potential of the PlayStation hardware. The game seemingly came out of nowhere, promoted heavily by juggernauts like Universal and Sony themselves. Today we're going to take a look at Crash's development and its importance to the PlayStation brand. Before they were Naughty Dog, founders Jason Rubin and Andy Gavin called themselves Jam Software. Under this banner they released a few titles for the Apple II family, but they were very small time, a couple of high school kids with no connections in the industry cranking out cool little games. Their big break came in 1989 when Keef the Thief was picked up for distribution by EA. To shed both their old image and the relationship with their old publisher, they renamed themselves Naughty Dog and inked their first milestone deal. They released a few games over the next few years, including Way of the Warrior for the 3DO. As the 32-bit generation loomed, however, they began work on a new title for the new hardware. The concept was simple enough. Take the old platformers and put them in 3D. There were some issues though, such as the character and the camera and the target hardware. You have to remember that these were the dark days of 3D gaming, well before the release of Mario 64, when most of the 3D games were experimental and mostly found on the PC. With that in mind, the game that became Crash started life out under the internal moniker of the Sonic's Arse game. This gives you an idea of the camera angle they imagined when developing the concept for the game. Work began on the engine, but the next step was to work out which piece of hardware they were actually developing for. It may be hard to believe now, but Sony was once considered the underdog in the console market compared to Nintendo and Sega. They had a deal years prior with Nintendo to develop a CD add-on for the SNES, but it had fallen through. The PlayStation was their attempt to take what they'd learned during the process and reap the rewards by themselves. It featured far superior 3D capabilities compared to the old consoles. It also surpassed the Sega Saturn in many ways, which had originally been developed with 2D games in mind and had become a nightmare to program for due to last-minute hardware retooling. The guys at Naughty Dog looked at the available hardware as well as upcoming consoles and determined that the PlayStation's hardware was the only one that could realistically achieve their vision. They had a bit of wriggle room in terms of their development schedule. They'd been signed to a 3-game deal with Universal Interactive Studios by Mark Cerny. You may recognise the name. He was one of the key architects behind the PlayStation 4. Jason and Andy had pleased Cerny with Way of the Warrior, so they were given the opportunity to develop a brand new engine for a brand new game on a brand new console. Not a bad arrangement, even if it was rather daunting. By now, everyone knows that Naughty Dog is one of the best in the business when it comes to creating technically brilliant game engines, and Crash is one of the earliest examples of this. The game made use of a rarely seen feature of the PlayStation hardware. Whereas most games on the console output a display of 320 by 240, Crash used a special 512 by 240 display. Andy Gavin discussed it as part of his wonderful series of blogs about the making of Crash Bandicoot. The PlayStation had this oddball 512 by 240 video mode that everyone else ignored. It wasn't standard and ate up video memory others wanted for textures, but it looked sharp, and we found the machine was really good at rendering shaded but untextured triangles. In fact, just as fast in the 512 mode as 320. Jason pointed out, he's always been the master of seeing the intersection between art and tech, that since polygons on 3D characters our size were just a few pixels, shaded characters actually looked better than textured ones. So we went with more polys on the characters, less texture. This was a highly unusual approach, but had lots of advantages. The characters popped, like cartoons are supposed to. We had lots more polygons to work with, and it worked around the PlayStation's lack of texture correction or polygon clipping. Be sure to check out Andy Gavin's blog for more information about this and all other aspects of Crash's development. Everything about the game looked fantastic. The animation was funny, the frame rate was smooth, and there was significantly less polygonal glitching compared to other early PlayStation titles. Naughty Dog steered clear of the majority of PlayStation development libraries, preferring to develop their own tools and twist the hardware to work the way they intended. The results were spectacular. Sony was shown the prototype after just over a year of development and came to the same conclusion, putting their marketing weight behind the title as a premier exclusive for the PlayStation.
At 22:16 hours, we got a call that a man was acting wildly in the store. It took us a while to control the situation. We've had 3 incidences this week. They're annoying.
Crash was thrown into the deep end to compete against the other upcoming 3D games of the era. The big showdown was set for E3 1996. In preparation, Naughty Dog finalised the details for the game, including the Crash character himself, and polished the demo for presentation. They knew they were up against some stiff competition, but none was going to be tougher than Mario 64. It can be argued that this event and the rivalry between the two games was what solidified the link between Sony and Crash in the minds of most people. Interestingly, Crash and Mario ended up being vastly different games. Crash played like a roller coaster, with short individual levels involving wild set pieces and high-octane gameplay in a restricted area. Mario 64 featured a more open-world layout, encouraging exploration and freedom of movement. The other interesting thing about Crash was that he was a character designed in the West and for a Western audience in mind. Up until this point, gaming mascots were developed largely for the Japanese marketplace. There was a brash, Looney Tunes-ish quality to Crash that separated him from the pack and helped carve out a space in gaming culture for himself. This was no accident. The character was carefully designed to appeal to a specific audience, and this approach delivered in spades. An interesting piece of trivia is that Crash's appearance was tweaked for the Japanese marketing materials. This slightly friendly Crash saw great success overseas, ensuring his place in gaming history.
Crash Bandicoot was a landmark title and had a fascinating development. In such a crowded genre, they really had to work hard to make their mark. Look, we just don't have time to talk about everything I'd like to talk about today, so if you're interested in this subject at all, I implore you, go and read Andy Gavin's blog about the making of Crash Bandicoot. I promise, it'll be a good few hours. You won't regret it.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of The Game Room. Please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and follow us on Twitter. And now I'm going to leave you with the Game Room quote of the week.